since I was born, I knew about the Hatfield and McCoys. It was more of a fun thing back in those days. I became more curious about the feud as I got a little bit older and realized that there was more to it than just jokes and fun. There was actual people involved.
Randolph was a prolific farmer, well renowned in the area. Devil Anse was an entrepreneur. So these were very, very similar men with similar takes. They were both family men.
When I look back at that feud, there was no way it could have been prevented. No way whatsoever.
I think the essence of the feud's origin is directly tied to the Civil War. The Civil War set the stage for local men and women to be self-sufficient, self-reliant.
The Civil War unleashed terrible passions. It gave men permission to do things out of the darkest recesses of their hearts, and they did. When James Abraham Garfield, who would later be our president, came to Pikeville and brought the Union Army in here, he kept the home guard that was working for the Union out of Pikeville pretty much under control. Now, when they pulled out, the people that were fighting for the Union had free reign in this area because most of those fighting for the Confederacy were gone, leaving their family farms defenseless. One of those raids by the Union Home Guard had within the group a McCoy, Asa Harmon McCoy. He participated in a raid on a good friend of my great-grandfather's and shot him.
Asa Harmon McCoy was the brother of Randolph. He had 2 slaves that he kept in his home, and yet he fought for the Union. Devil Anse was in the Confederacy, but he deserted and came back home to form a home guard. And the home guard looked after their own. That home guard took it upon themselves to end his life simply because of his affiliation with the Union. I think Randolph McCoy had a real passion for justice, at least from his point of view. And almost exclusively, he sought legal help. Local law enforcement was still in place. It just didn't have the teeth, the muscle to do anything, to effectively combat these home guards or even the armed civilian population.
They were the law. They set up the law themselves, and they had to deal with the law the way they felt it was important to deal with it.
Randolph McCoy sued my great-grandfather for stealing his horse. My great-grandfather was able to show that at that time he was still fighting for the 45th Virginia in 1864 and was still in camp. He won the case. But as today, lawsuits bring bitterness and they bring recrimination. So the bad blood was really there. Asa Harmon was dead, the lawsuits have been filed, false accusations have been made, and it just went from there.
The feud always escalated from one thing to another. Something as simple as a pig, an alleged stolen pig, escalated to this trial between the families. It just set the stage for animosity.
How we get from a legal dispute to a blood feud is because people don't accept the reality of law. They do whatever they got to do to make themselves feel better. In this particular case, it was proven that the Hatfields were innocent. And so to escalate that is an error.
We had the unfortunate event that took place at the election. They stabbed Ellison Hatfield 26 times. He was still alive. He was a big man.
It was just something, it began as an argument over a fiddle, money owed for a fiddle. And that wasn't his argument, that was his brother's argument, but he got into it and soon he had McCoys fighting him, 3 of them. So everything just escalated and very soon got out of control.
Then when that didn't seem to stop him, they shot him for good measure. Now he lived. His body was taken up north of Matewan into the hollow where he lived up there, and they waited to see whether he would survive his wounds or not.
I don't know that the feud within the historical context of all things being equal could have been avoided once it escalated to blood.
They then took the McCoy boys over to a schoolhouse and held them captive.
Sarah McCoy, my great-great-great-grandmother, actually crossed the river once the McCoy boys were rounded up and kept by the Hatfields in West Virginia. Actually went there on 3 occasions to plead for their lives.
Devil Anse promised her that her boys would be returned to Kentucky, but he didn't say whether they'd be dead or alive. It all hinged on what happened with Ellison. Ellison died. The Hatfields, they believed in mountain justice. They had a very weak law system over here. They were the law. And they believed in taking revenge. And they believed that if you did something wrong to them, they were going to even the score. And so my family took the McCoy boys down and tied them up, legend says, to pawpaw bushes. And some of those grow as big as trees. And they executed them. They were bewildered when people were angry with them for executing the boys, for burning down the cabin. They just thought this was warfare in the mountains and that this was just what people did.
Peace has to be selfless. So the first thing that has to happen is to lay down those goals, those self-pursuits, that sort of self-righteous, my way, my opinion matters, or my race or my religion is superior to yours.
My perspective of the feud is that it was a terrible tragedy.
Randolph, as an old man in Pikeville, was known to wander the streets sort of rambling and wanting to talk about the feud, to talk about his children, to talk about the story, to remember what had happened. As for Devil Anse, he ultimately became a Christian believer, became a man of peace in his old age.
If only I could have Randall McCoy and my great-grandfather Anse Hatfield sitting here right now, I would tell Randall McCoy, I understand. We killed 5 of your kids, and we did it in horrific ways. And I am so sorry for what we did to you. And I'm sure all the Hatfields now have regret. They expressed regret later. They had reconciliations. I would tell my grandfather Anse, I understand. I know you did what you thought was right, but we know now. We understand now. We are educated now. We know about God now. We know about the law now. If we'd have had a strong law presence here, they would have stamped this out long before.
Their legacy has lasted more than a century. Their children have gone on to have children, and extraordinary things have been done by both families. And I wish that both these men could know that their lives were not in vain. The feud was an awful legacy, but we didn't let it end there. We've done some very, very positive things. We've taken a very dark history and made something very positive out of it.
We have really come to grips with what happened. We've had reconciliations over the years that have been powerful and good, where both families got together.
And in this day and age, we have people that work so hard to distinguish themselves, exaggerate their differences, religion, race, sexual preference, it doesn't matter. They go work really hard to find things that separate us. And I think the Hatfield McCoy is a splendid example of why that doesn't work.
The lessons that you can learn from our reconciliation are that even when people do terrible things to each other and their families, and in our case it was 150 years ago, we do not hold each other today personally responsible for what our relatives did under the conditions in which they lived.
I think by using the truce and these annual reunions and these events that we do collectively has created new chapters to the history. The families come together peacefully and work together jointly to present an image of peace to the world.
In this community, we get along, and it's not the Hatfield and McCoys feuding, it's the Hatfield and McCoys having fun. It's the Hatfield and McCoys sharing love with each other in friendship. It's the Hatfield and McCoys trying to preach to the world, look, we are good people. We are truly involved in our community, and we truly love America, and we truly believe in the freedoms of America.
If we can come together and we can bring peace to each other, and if we can come together and work, so can America.